Our keynote speaker this morning is Bruce Vincent. Bruce Vincent is a third-generation logger from Libby, Montana. He is co-owner of the public relations firm Environomics, volunteers as executive director of Provider Pals, and is a board member of the Evergreen Foundation. Bruce speaks throughout the United States and the world, testifies on resource issues before Congress, and has appeared on several news programs, such as 60 Minutes. Bruce has been named Timberman of the Year in Montana, National Forest Activist of the Year, received the inaugural Presidential Preserve America Award from President Bush, has been named Keeper of the 10th by Women in Farm Economics, and received American Agri-Woman's Veritas Award. He recently co-wrote a book named Against the Odds, A Path Forward for Rural America. It is a powerful first-hand account of life in rural America that offers a broad, probing look at the environmental tensions surrounding the collapse of many of our rural resource communities. Bruce and his wife of 40 years, Patty Jo, have 4 children and 11 grandchildren. His current activities represent a family commitment to responsible environmentalism. Please give a warm welcome to Bruce Vincent.
Okay, I'm going to get my rigging straightened around up here, and while I do that, I'll fill you in a little bit more on my background so you have a bit better idea of why I've asked a logger to come talk to you. That'll also let me get what I had for breakfast back where it belongs. I don't know how many of you like to stand up in front of people and talk, but I do it a lot, and it makes me sick every time. And I've tried to figure out a trick that works. I'm imagining all of you naked. I don't know what that's doing to your stomach, but it ain't settling mine, so I found that if I do biography, the bio goes back where it belongs. I am from Libby, Montana. Has anybody ever been to Libby, Montana? Oh, anybody ever been there on purpose? 1, tourism's our future. Yeehaw! A little tiny 2,800 people, 90 miles from Kalispell, Montana. It's a timber and mining town, beautiful place to grow up. We got stunning scenery. It's the home of the Libby Loggers. I graduated as a proud Libby Logger. Great culture there that we share our little area with a lot of the charismatic megafauna, I call it, that America loves. Grizzly bears, wolves. Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation was started in Libby, Montana by my neighbor, a logger who loved to take care of habitat for elk, so we're proud of what we share. That hasn't always been the way it is. Back in the old days, the town was started by timber barons. The timber barons were very real. They would whack the trees down in one area and move to the next. The family that started Libby was busy whacking the trees down in northern Minnesota, building the Twin Cities, and when they ran out of trees around Bemidji and Cass Lake, they looked across the prairie. The Great Northern Railroad had just been built, so they loaded the town and the sawmill on the brand new railroad and offloaded in the first patch of trees. That was northwest Montana. Their practices were a little rough. It was socially acceptable. It was economically viable. We were subduing the wilderness. We were conquering the continent. So people thought that was the way things were. But it was rough. It was rough on the land. It was rough on the people. That's not the way we do business anymore. My part of logging, that part that I put myself through college doing, was being a sawyer. We don't even do that a great deal anymore. Now, just like the rest of agriculture, and timber is agriculture, by the way, the difference between us and growing corn is it takes us 100 years to figure out whether or not we screwed up. But now we have $500,000 pieces of machinery that have wide footprints, so it's easier on the land. The operators sit inside an air-conditioned cab doing joysticks and listening to Sirius radio. It's easier on the operators. It's easier on the land. And it makes us have a really good relationship with our bank. The biggest change, though, is that timber baron family in the 1920s and 30s, they were reaching the end of their private industrial forest land. 90% of our land around in my county is owned by the federal government or the state government. But their private industrial land, they were reaching the end of that, and they looked across Idaho and Washington, and timber barons had already been there. So they developed something that was novel at the time. It's still studied by the World Commission on Forestry. They decided that if they wanted to be in forestry, they needed to do something besides whack the trees down. They needed to start planting. They started planting 6 trees for every one they harvested. They developed a 200-year management plan for the forest around our community. They decided that if they took care of the forest, it would take care of us and future generations. It was in that deep, steep culture of conservation and stewardship that I was raised. But I left as a proud Libby logger and went to Portland, Oregon to go to college. Didn't take me long to figure out when I went to college, the kids I was going to school with did not look at me as a steward. They looked at me as an axe-murdering Neanderthal. According to them, I was killing the trees. One of the summers when I was home murdering trees, I met my wife, PJ, which isn't entirely true. She was not my wife when I met her. Although I tried that. I'd been in the logging camp a couple of weeks and went to town, and there she was. She had a tube top and a tan, and I said, "You're my wife." She wasn't. She's a pretty strong-willed woman, and I'm still scarred from that stupid remark. But we fell in love, got married, moved to Portland to go to college together, and we learned that we had accidentally manufactured a child. And we learned that it took a lot more logging to go to school when there were 2 going on 3 of us. So we moved from Portland to Spokane. I enrolled at Gonzaga. I enrolled there because it was 3.5 hours from home. I could go to school Monday through Thursday, and Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I could go home and log. On one of those weekends, we accidentally manufactured another child, and PJ said, "Something has got to stop." So I quit school because we got our priorities straight. No, we didn't quit either one very good. It took 10 years and 4 kids, but we made it through Gonzaga. Got a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering, a Master's in Business Administration, got a job at the construction company in that city of 250,000, and we were on our career ladder to yuppiedom. One night we were watching the kids play in the yard, and we noticed 2 really important things. They were playing inside a chain link fence inside a city. And to this day, we are perpetually pleased that there are hundreds of millions of Americans that make the urban choice. We stayed up all night and talked about what we wanted for us and what we wanted for our kids. And while my wife was raised in San Jose, California, she appreciated the culture that I was raised in. So we decided we wanted to raise our kids in that culture. Hard-working, hard-playing, community-oriented, family-oriented, church-oriented, school-oriented people I grew up with was what we wanted to raise our family in. So in February 1984, we packed our crap in a U-Haul and we went back to Montana. We were the only loaded U-Haul going into Montana in February. Went back and joined the family logging company. Family logging companies are no different than family farms, family ranches, family small businesses in a community. I was started by Mom and Dad. Vincent Logging was in the mid-'60s, and in the early days of the company, us kids would strap coveralls on, and so would Mom, and we'd hand Dad wrenches. The goal was to have the machinery operating Monday morning when Dad hit the brush with the crew and Mom hit the office attached to the house. They ultimately grew the operation to include 65 other families. In our town of 2,800, that's a big outfit. It is also very isolated, so a lot of them were cousins. That's how that works. My dad once said, "Rural people don't wave because we're friendly. We wave because we just don't know." Might be some DNA going by. Hi! Those 65 employees included Mom and Dad's 4 boys. I am the second of 4. We lost Mom a while ago, and a few years ago we lost my dad. It's now my wife at my side as we try to figure out what we have to hand to the next generation. As Clarence Anthony just talked about, what we're trying to do in our area is build a culture and an economic foundation where if our kids choose to come back to Montana, there's something for them to do when they come back to Montana. This is my crew. That's a nice picture on the 4th of July. I don't know why people don't move to Montana. If everything was okay outside of my house, if everything was as good as it is inside of my house, we've been married now 42 years, and we have 11 and a half grandkids. And if everything was as good outside of my house as it is inside, I wouldn't be in front of you. I'd be home working in the family logging outfit. But something started to go wrong outside, and that's what led me here. If it weren't, I'd be with the most awesome mate on earth doing exactly what I want to do, where I want to do it, with the person I'd like to do it with. Instead, I'm standing in front of you. And what I'm going to talk about is the trail that we've been on since we figured out something was going wrong. And this is largely going to be a rural trail. But I'm hoping, Clarence also mentioned that you guys should maybe learn, and maybe you can learn some ideas you can steal from somebody else. Maybe the trail that our rural communities have been on, there's a nugget in there that you can take even if you're from Tucson or Phoenix or Flagstaff. Because the things we face are common problems. Largely common problems with communication, common problems of being able to listen to each other, common problems of having respect for each other and different ideas. So as I tell the tale of what's happened in the rural community and what I think I've learned in this trail, I hope you can pick something up. What I have learned is that there is something wrong in rural America, in natural resource America. What's wrong is and I'm going to go over that, where are we? Where do I think we are in rural areas? How do I think we got there? What can we do to turn things around? And why, after almost 30 years of being on the stump, I have more hope for rural America and the rest of America today than I did when I first started jacking my jaw. Where are we? We're having what I call a collision of visions. I'm having a collision with this PowerPoint right now. We're having a collision of visions with the rest of America because for the last 50 years, Americans have had two things that humanity had never had before. They're luxuries, time and money. For the last 50 years, Americans have been using their 2-week summer vacation to blow out of where they live and come to our areas and commune with us. They come to Arizona to see the beauty of Arizona. They fly into Phoenix, the airport, rent a car, and blow out to Sholo. And when they're driving, they fall in love. They fall in love with the things that they see outside of their rental car window that they thought was already destroyed. How many of you love the environment of Arizona? I love the environment of Montana. But if you live in New York City or Chicago and you've gotten 200 channels of bad news since you were 5 years old and you thought that the environment was destroyed, well, here it is, right outside your rental car window. Clean air, awesome. Clean water, awesome. Abundant wildlife. These are things you thought you had to go to the zoo to see. And they fall in love. And who can blame them? Those are the very things we love about living in places like Arizona and Montana. They even fall in love with our culture. They have no idea what makes it tick. But I can tell you, if they're blowing through eastern Montana on I-90 at 85 miles an hour and they see a cowboy, they will slide to a stop. Oh, honey, look, a cowboy. What's he do? I have no idea, but did you see the hat? The rural definition of America, that Americana, is also something that they thought you had to catch in a movie. They thought it was gone. But here it is in a 4th of July parade in Troy, Montana. It's alive, it's well, it's awesome. And then they have to leave. And when they leave with a desire, and it's a desire we ought to fully understand. It's a desire to protect. They want to save what they call the last best places. And I don't disagree with that desire at all. When they go home and start fighting to implement legislative reform, regulatory reform, judicial reform, to implement their vision of protection, we end up having a problem. Because Will Rogers was right. He once said, it ain't what you don't know that's a problem, it's what you know that ain't so that's a problem. And they know a lot that just ain't so about the policy they clamor for to protect these areas that they think are the last best chunks of America. And sometimes their policies that they demand be implemented have a perverse reaction in the reality of the world we live in. I got to see this up close and personal the first time, and I learned the public wanted to save the forest. Well, kismet. So do I. I thought, the truth is on our side. We're planting 6 trees for every one we harvest. America has more trees now than it did at the turn of the last century because of production agriculture. Growing more food on less acres means that we can let those acres that were marginal trying to grow corn and cotton go back to what God and nature intended them to be. And in most places in America, that's trees. So I thought, yay, we've got the truth on our side. How could we possibly lose? However, when America looks at the situation from their rental car window, and they see something like this is the drainage behind my home. They think that's beautiful, it's green, it must be healthy. And it would stay that way forever and ever, amen, if we just leave it alone. Do you know what that patch looked like 15,000 years ago? It was under a mile of ice. It was during the Ice Age. There were no trees. The ice has melted, which is why I don't argue with people about global warming. I think we've warmed up. Might not be cow farts that did it, but we've warmed up. And when it started warming, when the ice receded, humans moved in, Native Americans, and they started managing our little patch of turf, and they'd managed for thousands of years. They would come into our little valley, and they would, utilitarian-wise, they would use the area as they needed, and then on their way out, they would burn it. Because trees were not their friend. They couldn't see their prey, they couldn't see their enemies, and the ungulates they ate didn't eat trees, they ate grass. So they managed the forest using fire for thousands of years. When white man showed up, there were 50 or 60 trees to the forested acre in our area. It was thick-barked, big trees that would withstand the intermittent every 10 to 12-year fire. But we removed them from the landscape in the 1800s with disease and then moved them onto reservations. We removed their management tool as well. And so the little trees that were killed by intermittent fire have grown up into big trees now. And we've got a real problem, and the real problem isn't what America thinks, that we're almost out of trees. We have too many of the wrong size, of the wrong type, in the wrong place. And America doesn't understand that, but our forest does. Because everybody needs to understand that trees are water pumps. A pine tree in the Rocky Mountains sucks 200 to 300 gallons of water out of the ground a day. If you have 50 or 60 of them to the acre, that's one thing. You have 500 to 600 of them, and suddenly they're competing for water. We can have a normal water year and have abnormally drought-conditioned forests that are giving off a pheromone that only bugs can smell. When they're fighting for water, they give off a smell. The bugs can tell which trees are weak. They drill into the bark of the tree, they get into the cambium layer. A good healthy tree will pitch them out with their sap. That's why we call it pitch. An unhealthy tree will lose the battle to the bugs. The drainage behind my house has lost the battle to the bugs. For the first time in recorded history, we have more mortality in the Rocky Mountain forest than we do growth. And it's not just because of climate change. Yes, the climate is changing. It's also because we've removed the management tool that was used for thousands of years, and we have not replaced it with anything except lawsuits. What happens when 192 million acres of the forested West looks like that? We have problems. It could look like this. We could modernize our timber industry to do the right thing with the forest, replicate the mechanics of the natural fire system, remove the little trees, leave the big trees. That's a managed forest. It looks very similar to what it looked like when the Native Americans were managing. We can produce products then for the most consumptive society on earth. We don't log because it's fun, we log because people want that crap. Not crap. It's really good stuff. Furniture, pellets, 2x4s. We can do that. We can supply the needs of our nation. And then we can reintroduce low ground hugging fire. My son-in-law is the assistant fire management officer for the U.S. Forest Service in our area. He wants to burn because the forest needs fire. We have heat-sensitive lodgepole pine cones that only open during fires. It's God's cover crop. We need fire. It invigorates the topsoil. It grows huckleberry bushes for our grizzly bear population. But if we don't remove the trees first, then we end up with problems because the trees that are still standing there are called fuel ladders. And instead of the fire staying on the forest floor, it climbs up these ladders into the canopy of the forest. And this is what places like Montana and Arizona are enjoying right now. Those are not stand regenerating fires, they're stand destroying fires. We have fires that have so much fuel in Montana right now as I'm talking that they're burning so hot that the clay soil is being fired into ceramics. It will take another ice age to pop that cap and grow my great-grandchildren's trees. And it's not just bad for us. That is not Photoshop, that's the Bitterroot River. It was a bad day for those elk. And we're told tourism should be our future. It's tough to sell postcards when that's the backdrop on your little store. There's got to be a better way. We think there's a better way. But the public's truth is not the same as our reality. And policy in this country is not defined by reality. It is defined by the public's perception of reality. And the public is trying to do the right thing. They're trying to do what we all need to do, be concerned about the environment, particularly in areas where I live. They want to be concerned about the forest. But we're not alone now. The public is also concerned about our ranching areas, our mining areas, our farming areas. And something is wrong when a mining reform is not a process of assuring us that we can have copper and clean water and clean air, and instead is used as a bludgeoning device to drive copper mining companies out of places like Arizona and Montana and into places like Venezuela and Peru, where they use methods we quit using 30 years ago, and we'll call it green because we don't have to look at the production process. Something's wrong in ranching communities when grazing reform should be a promise of good forage, clean water for future ranching families, and instead it's used as a bludgeoning device to drive ranchers out of places like Arizona and into places like Brazil and Paraguay. Something's wrong when professional resource managers have lost or abdicated their ability to manage to professional litigants whose agenda has more to do with greed, power, control, and social engineering than it does environmental stewardship. Something's wrong when America is rightfully concerned about the environment, but gets important information on this important subject from such noted experts as Dr. Meryl Streep. The woman pretends for a living. When she weighed in on the ALAR issue early on in this discussion, it was determined ultimately to be a joke, but by the time the joke was found out, apple-growing families in small communities in central Washington and upstate New York were decimated. Dr. Woody Harrelson, did you see him being interviewed by CNN? Hanging from the Golden Gate Bridge, they were talking to him about redwood forestry like he's an expert. He's a pot-smoking loon. And Dr. Ted Turner, just because he once owned a stinking satellite, that doesn't make him an expert on whatever bounces off of it. But when they spew their misinformation, disinformation, pseudoscience, half-truths at an unknowing public, when that stuff is printed as the truth, that's what we base public policy on. And what kind of lens does America have to run this stuff through to test it for the truth? Do they have the lens that we have in rural areas? No, they don't. The lens they have is built on 60 years of Bambi. They think before you showed up in Arizona, wolves were raising orphaned rabbits in the Sea of Old Growth. They have no idea that that's a Disney-esque ecotopia that never has existed and never can exist. But they pine for it. And sadly, that's a danger. We are crossing the thin line between environmental sensitivity and environmental insanity. And it's not on purpose. It's all with the right intentions. But our country, the most consumptive on earth, could become the biggest problem for our global environment through misguided lockup of our own. The question isn't, are we going to manipulate the environment for humankind? The question is, who's going to? Where are they going to? How are they going to? And are we going to be the culture that decides that we don't want to produce for ourselves? We just like consumption. We'll bring raw products from developing countries that are long on resources, long on population, and short on cash, and call it green? We're exporting environmental burdens to nations that can't afford the burden. And that is insane. How did we get here? I go back to the 60s. How many of you remember the 1960s? My generation has a problem with that decade. We might not have inhaled, but we ate the entire plate of brownies. And now we're in leadership. Woohoo! Some important things happened though, particularly in communication. We're in a new communication wave now with social media, but back then it was television. We all had television, and for the first time in human history, you didn't have to be someplace to see what was happening there in real time. And I was a kid in Montana when the Cuyahoga River caught on fire and burned for a week through Cleveland. I wasn't very old, but I remember looking at the tube thinking rivers should not burn their bridges up. Maybe we should have a law against that. You didn't have to live in the Great Lakes to understand that they were dying. You got to watch the fish swimming wrong side up every night. You didn't have to live in Los Angeles to know that their air shed was turning purple. And then from the eyeballs of a humanoid in a spaceship almost to the moon, we got to see our little blue ball called Earth from a distance. It was kind of bobbing along in blackness. What happened because of communication is we figured out we have one planet. We are only getting one planet. And some of the stuff we were doing to it needed to stop. We empowered the environmental social movement. We needed that movement to get laws on the books to take care of home, planet Earth. It was that movement that helped us get the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, the Endangered Species Act, the Wilderness Act, the Multiple Use Sustained Yield Act. There are a couple dozen major pieces of legislation designed to take care of home. If a group didn't exist or a movement didn't exist, we invented it. I was the leader of the first Earth Day in Libby. We picked up crap in the creek going by the middle school. A good friend of mine, a logger's son from Vancouver Island, was getting his forest ecology doctorate from the University of British Columbia. He didn't like the atom bomb dropping on the Bikini Atoll. So he and a friend started Greenpeace. We empowered these groups. But somehow, that movement was hijacked. That movement was hijacked by some people that figured out in the 60s, 70s, and 80s that they could make a lot of money. They could make a lot of money marketing just one product. And the product they learned to sell was not environmental stewardship. The product they learned to sell was fear. They turned what was a social movement into a business of conflict. And they're very good at what they do. I call it the eco-conflict industry. They have a business strategy that includes scaring people out of $20 a year. They just have to have the right message point. They do focus groups. They do polling. They find out what scares people. They're good businessmen, and when I'm speaking on university campuses, some good idealistic kids that are going door to door for one of these groups, they get angry when I call them an industry. But look at their structure. They've got CEOs, CFOs, COOs. They've got boards of directors with the fiduciary responsibility of generating a product. If you're a Wayne Pacelli with the Humane Society, you better know how to make $150 million a year run in the door. You get your butt fired. So they've turned that, not all of them, but some of them have turned into an industry that rural America is running right into. Because we didn't understand it. And we inadvertently participated in their strategy. We didn't know we were, but they were excellent marketers of stop doing that, and it made us mad. They're still pumping their message. The conflict industry is very good at selling things, and they do it really starkly. Watch the news sometime, and they'll take the complex issue of a rural environmental situation and boil it into two choices for the American public to decide from. If they want to talk about forestry, there's the visuals. Visuals are really important, and now we got it on our smartphone, our iPad, our computer screen, our television that's 72 inches wide. And there's the visual for forest management. The bud ugly is clear cut. You can see it from the moon. The last tree falling into a sea of stumps, that's forestry. And the guy who doesn't like it stands in front of a pristine mountain scene with the babbling brook, flag in one hand, bald eagle in the other, and all he wants is clean air and water for his children. If they want to talk to somebody from the timber industry, who do they get? They'll find some knuckle-dragging Neanderthal from Oregon with snooze dribbling down his chin. He says, God, I like to make stumps, and he's wearing an Eat a Owl t-shirt. That's our guy. God, I wish he'd stay home. Or they get a three-piece suit and tie from Weyerhaeuser, and in front of a 30-story building in downtown Tacoma, he says, America wants wood fiber, and by God, we provide it. And that's the end of the 20 seconds, and America gets to pick. Which one would we pick if we didn't know any better? And we're not the only ones. Talk to a fifth grader about what oil looks like. Dead black birds bobbing in the dead black Gulf. The BP oil spill is oil. And the guy who doesn't like it stands in front of the Gulf Coast, flag in one hand, bald eagle in the other. Mining, it's some yellow river somewhere. Some mining methods that were used many times over 100 years ago, but that's mining. Dead birds in a settling pond. The guy who doesn't like it stands by the Continental Divide, flag in one hand, bald eagle in the other. Agriculture, domestic production agriculture is presented as the application of chemicals. You watch every single time. Animal agriculture, anybody in here from a ranching community? Animal agriculture is having a tough time right now because there is a YouTube video of a black and white cow with a forklift through the side getting drugged through 6 inches of manure in California. Millions of people have seen that. You want that, or do you want Wayne Pacelli petting a puppy and all he wants to do is save the puppy? We get mad. Those are not the two choices. Stewardship, conservation is somewhere between preserve and destroy. Taking care of humanity is somewhere between those two extreme choices. But the public doesn't know this. And the public is 4 generations from the farm. And we've laughed at them with what they don't know. It's not uncommon to hear someone in the rural area say, those stupid people in Phoenix think milk comes from a carton at Safeway. In the timber industry, we say the stupid people in Seattle think boards just show up at Home Depot, and on sale day, a bunch of boards show up. We kind of laugh because we know where their stuff comes from, and we really don't believe we have many legs up on our urban cousins. But we know that. It's not fun. What it does is provide a fertile marketplace. We're laughing that the conflict industry is using that fertile marketplace to market to those fears. And that's a problem for our rural communities. It's a problem for our environment. What we need to talk to folks about is a concept called oikos. I wanted to call my company Oikos, but we need to understand the public is discussing our issue. And our rural challenge is to talk to them about our culture, our business practices. Because if the public believes they have to choose between our business, our culture, our rural community, and their environment, which are they going to pick? Which should they pick? They're making the right choice. They've been given the wrong things to choose from. What we should talk to them about is oikos. Economy and ecology come from the same Greek root word. Oikos is eco. It means house. The inside of our house is our economy. The outside's our ecology. They're joined at the hip. You beat one up, the other pays the price. If you don't take care of the ecology, the environment of Arizona, you cannot hope to grow a sustainable long-term economy in Arizona. But if you don't have a healthy, vigorous, profit-making economy, you don't have the economic luxury of caring for the environment. We're only having this debate in America because we're rich enough to do so. They're not debating view sheds in Zimbabwe. They're talking about food tomorrow night. When poverty is driving an area's bust, the environment's way in the back, behind food, clothing, shelter, and the basic human rights. We need to talk to the public about that. But particularly in timber towns, we fought. We fought for far too long. And that's me. I was leading the fight. We had 5,000 people in Phoenix during the Mexican spotted owl debate. We marched around the Capitol building. We convoyed the trucks. We thought we were doing something noble. What we were doing was participating in a conflict strategy. We drove the story to the front page where the conflict industry got to ask Arizonans, do you want to save the forest or do you want the marching Neanderthals to whack them all down? We were the tit for their tat. We finally learned that there was an enemy. We learned that the enemy that we had to face was ignorance. And it wasn't just the public's ignorance. The real ignorance we had to address was our own. Because we knew how to fight, and like Clarence Anthony said, there's a difference between getting elected and governing. We had to learn to lead. Because fighting was getting us nowhere. We were losing the war. We finally began to learn how to lead. We learned 3 truths the hard way. The first truth we learned was democracy works, but it's not a spectator sport. We had to be engaged. Right now, the engagement is not pretty. But I'll tell you what, when people say it's never been this ugly before, I wish we could talk to Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton. It's never been a doily tossing contest. There's always been vigorous debate. It's ugly right now. It's way uglier than it should be right now. But we've had 2 revolutions in the last decade and a half that were bloodless. Try that anyplace else on earth. And we're probably going to have another one this fall, and in 2 years we'll have another one. The system works, but we've got to be engaged in it. So what I encourage rural people to do is engage in that system. Some people want to run for office. We need to support them. And by the way, it doesn't matter which party. Most rural people don't care if you belong to the pajama party. What we want to know is, do you understand the issues and are you willing to help us lead to solutions? I know democracy works because of my oldest boy. He wanted to be a logger. He went to Oregon State University to get a forest engineering degree. Second year of school, they told him they would only guarantee placement upon graduation if he had 2 foreign languages. They strongly suggested Russian and Portuguese. That told him the Amazon and Siberia. So he quit school, came home, logged for a year, went back to the University of Montana, got a political science degree with a minor in communications and forestry, and he has served 3 terms as our state representative. He's currently our sitting senator. And he's the chair of the Natural Resource Committee, the chair of the Environmental Quality Committee, and he and his generation on both sides of the aisle. By the way, he is the first sitting Republican to get a gift from the Democratic caucus on the Senate floor because he learned from our trials and tribulations in rural areas how to reach across and talk about ideas instead of just fighting about ideas. Democracy does work. The most important level of democracy right now is healthy and vigorous. We're watching this fight go on in Washington, D.C., but believe me, the future of places like Arizona and Montana is largely going to be defined by local government, local water boards, local school boards, local planning commissions, city councils, county commissions. That's the last level of democracy where reality has to be addressed. That's where I have the most hope. Democracy does work, particularly at local levels, and I want to thank you guys. This is a room full of people who are dedicated to that noble concept of learning to lead, learning to govern. So thank you for my grandkids, because you give me hope. They might be doing what they're doing in Washington, D.C., but the hope of our rural areas lies in this room. Second truth we learned is that when people lead, leaders follow. There aren't many loggers in Washington, D.C. There's one logger in Helena. He's my son. So he has a bunch of people he's got to talk to about what a solution might look like. And what we've got to do is, as people, we've got to be informing you on what solutions might look like. We've got to be collaborating and getting opposing views at a table, in a local table of debate. We've got a collaborative process that's been going for 20 years up in our little neck of the woods. And the groups that were fighting each other 25 years ago are now at the table finding common solutions. You're doing the same thing in Arizona. Those collaborative processes do work, and it doesn't just have to be about timber issues. It could be about transportation or affordable housing. Get opposing views, get them to a table, collaborate on what a solution might look like. Be prepared to not get the whole pie in one bite. Take incremental steps towards a vision of what you would like Arizona to look like in 200 years. When people lead, leaders follow. But for far too long, all we did as people, and that's me, we whined about what was. We didn't help craft what could be. We finally figured out we needed to do that. Final truth was the world is run by those who show up. There are meetings held every day talking about the future of Arizona, and we would go to work and complain about the people who were doing those meetings. Well, we have to have dedicated time to flopping our butt down at that table of collaboration, because the world is run by those who show up. We started showing up. When we started showing up, we learned to develop a solution strategy instead of just being a participant in a fight. And that was tough, because there's something sexy about being in the fight because you're on the front page. It's tough work sitting at a table once a month for 5 years and arguing with people that don't have the same worldview as you. But that's where the real work gets done. We learned to develop a solution. In forestry, we got the Healthy Forest Initiative. We worked on it for several years, presented it to Congress. It's the most progressive forest legislation since Teddy Roosevelt. By the way, it did get stuck in the Senate, but when it was stuck in the Senate and we were trying to move it forward, San Diego caught on fire. You get 10,000 people on their $1 million home with the $6 hose going, "This sucks!" And suddenly the politics of healthy forests changed, and Dianne Feinstein and Senator Boxer were on our side, and we got it passed. George Bush signed it. It's going to take 20 years to implement it, but it's a window to the future for our children, because we all want the same thing. We want a healthy forest. The nuts and bolts of getting there are going to take collaborative efforts at the local level. We've got it. Collaboration and vision do work. We also learned that when we were attacked, and this was a hard one, when we were attacked, we wanted to fight back. What we learned is we have to try really hard to not deliver a response that just contributes to their strategy. We need to deliver a response that leads to a solution for us, for the environment, and for the public that is rightfully concerned about the issues we're grappling with. We also learned that there are three things that have to intersect if we're ever going to get the public to agree on anything. And I encourage you to remember this in your local government. This was taught to me by a guy named Dr. Bob Lee, the Associate Dean of the School of Forestry at the University of Washington. Doctorate in rural sociology, doctorate in forestry from Yale, rural sociology from Berkeley. The guy's a brain. The head of the Man and Biosphere Project. He told me early on, if you're going to get people to agree to something, three things have to intersect. What you're asking them to do has to be possible. It has to be possible to do it. It has to be gainful. They have to get something out of it. And it has to be acceptable. The public has to say you can do that. Those three things have to intersect before anything will happen. And that was a tough concept for us, because we could see what was acceptable and possible and gainful for us. We had to work on sustainability, and that meant giving up a little bit of gainfulness today for tomorrow. And we also had to sit down and look at what's in it for someone I don't agree with, because they've got the same three things they're grappling with: possible, acceptable, and gainful. So I encourage you as leaders to put on the glasses of the people you're talking with and see what's in it for them. Because when you begin to see that, it's easy to see what's in it for you, for us. But we had to learn to take a walk in someone else's shoes, put on someone else's lens. What's in it for them? And if we can't deliver that, we're never ever going to reach a compromise. And in order to give somebody the ability to give up gainfulness today, a couple things have to be in place. They have to have hope. Hopeless people make terrible decisions, which is part of what scares me today. My generation got scared because of the nuclear potential, that somebody in the world could poke the wrong button on a red phone and turn us into a nuclear shadow. So we tuned in, turned on, and dropped out. We can't do that to another generation. A generation that is looking for what's possible, acceptable, and gainful needs to understand that there is hope for the future. They also have to have some certainty. They have to be certain that the rug isn't going to get jerked out from under them. And they have to be hearing it from someone they trust. Another thing that's getting beat up today. I encourage you to remember this. When you're sitting and talking with people you don't agree with, put their glasses on and see what's in it for them. See how you can move towards them in order to offer what's possible and acceptable for you. We learned that. Some other tips we learned that might help you in leadership. Our rural areas learned that HELP, to me, stands for humanize, empathize, and educate, lead, and participate. I'm going to go through these really quickly. I do seminars on them, but I almost didn't put these slides in, but you guys are the heart of what's going to make my great-grandchildren be able to choose to live in a rural culture in the West. What do I mean by humanize? Social norms make it really easy to vilify opposing sides. Industry used to be a noble thing. Now people attach industry to something in order to diminish it somehow. Agribusiness. You see that term thrown about all the time. Agribusiness sounds bad. Factory farms. Our side uses the same type of terminology. We dehumanize people by calling them environmental wackos, greenies, tree huggers. That's dehumanizing. And it removes our ability to engage at a collaborative table. Society wants information. Oh, big government. And you guys get to face that all the time. People don't like big government. But they love their government, their local government. They want it to work for them. We need to humanize these issues. You guys, local governments, you humanize democracy. Most people don't get to see the folks in Washington, D.C. or some invisible bureaucrat. They get to see you. You humanize this process. Be constantly aware of that. Because the humanity, society, wants to hear information from a human face that they can trust. It's imperative for them to move forward. You are that face. Then we learned that we needed to empathize, and we sucked at this. By we, I mean me. We always went to right to education. I've got some crap, I need to tell you something. Well, you know what folks did? If we had all the truth on our side, we were positive of it, stood on street corners right out here. But when someone stands on my porch, bangs on my door, and starts yelling truth through it, hair goes up on the back of my neck. That's what happened. We learned that we needed to empathize first. And what does empathize mean? It means understand the expressed concerns. What do others think are real issues? What solutions are acceptable to other people? We had to learn the hard way that we need to engage in, own, and showcase solution-oriented initiatives that address the concerns of the public. This isn't just lips talking about it, it's actually taking steps. Like Clarence Anthony was talking about. He got elected, learned to govern, to take steps. But the first part of that was empathizing with the concern. And for far too long, particularly in our rural areas, it was easy to dehumanize them by calling them environmental wackos and then not listening. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth. We were using the 1 mouth. We should have been using our 2 ears way more. Listen, 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 and then just not hear, but understand and respect. Because we finally learned that the leadership message that was going to save us was fairly simple. So I'm listening, I understand, I respect, or I share your concerns, and I'm doing my part to answer those concerns. Nowhere in there does it say you have to agree. It just means that you empathize, you hear, you listen, you understand, you respect. Man, are we short on that right now. We've got to get there, and you folks can lead that discussion. I'm listening is the first thing folks want to hear. I understand or I respect. We finally figured that out. That's how we got the Healthy Forest Initiative. Then we can educate, but education means not playing reverse jeopardy. That's what I call it. We found ourselves answering all the questions the public wasn't asking. We were telling them what we wanted them to know, not asking them what they wanted to know. That's reverse jeopardy, and it blows up in your face. Listen first, and then answer the questions. And when you answer the questions, answer them in English. We threw fight papers at people for a long time. Need to answer it in language that they can understand. We also have to watch our language. And by that gets back to the empathizing part. Be very careful labeling people. That is a dehumanizing effort. It takes away from our ability to collaborate and find common ground solutions. So watch our language, and I talk about that a lot in rural areas. I am a greenie, and I'm proud of it. I'm not going to label somebody a wacko, because I'm probably going to want to sit down and talk to them and ask them what their concerns are. So be very careful with our language. And then be very careful about how angry we get, because you guys have way more information than your constituents do. You've got complex issues, and how many of you get frustrated that people are making very emotional decisions about a very complex issue? Do you get tired of that? No, we do. Good heavens, forestry is complicated. People are making emotional decisions about there used to be a tree, now there's a stump, that's got to be bad. We had to understand that we're emotional too. Every single human being is emotional. That's what drives us. We have a hard time with it, but there's a gal that I wrote the book with, Nicole Widmar is her name, she's from Purdue University, and she showed a bunch of ag execs these 2 slides, and it drove it home for me. See that pickup? That's a Dodge 4-wheel drive quad cab Hemi engine. That's awesome. Barbie edition. How many of you would go look at that on the showroom floor? And she showed them this slide. Dodge 4-wheel drive quad cab Hemi engine parked on a steel gray. How many would look at that one? And all the hands went up. Same science, different package. We're emotional too. That's part of the human condition. So we need to understand that oftentimes packaging is as important as the science or the issue we're trying to get across. And then, after we're done empathizing, humanizing, empathizing, and educating, we can begin to lead. And that means crafting and implementing solutions that answer the public's questions and that we can live with. And for far too many people, they want the whole answer now. They want the pie. We need to learn to take bites together that lead towards some kind of common solution. We finally learned that working toward a solution incrementally is way better than fighting against a solution getting shoved down our throat. And we learned to focus on growing local voices. We learned to focus on empowering our local folks with information so that they could have intelligent discussions. We learned to develop visions for areas. Libya is working on its 200-year vision right now so that we can together talk about what tomorrow might be. And we learned that we needed to participate. That's what the P stands for. Strategic planning line item in all of our small businesses and communities for collaborative engagement to finding solutions. It takes time. It's not sexy. It's work. It doesn't make the paper. But man, is that where our future is going to be found. And God bless you for committing your life to it. Local government can lead the way. There are a list of things. I'm only going to hit a couple of them. Conservation initiatives that are real and collaborative, they really do work, and we should showcase them. Rural and urban leadership programs, Project Central, Arizona State University. I address it every year. In fact, in about a month, I'm going to be in Sholo. Those urban-rural leadership programs work. Anybody in here been in Project Central? Yay! That program works. If you don't want to attend it, at least support it. They need constant support. But those things change lives. We finally started one in Montana. There's 36 programs in the nation now. Montanans is the 36th because it works. Welcome wagons, that's on the list there. Open houses and tours. Go see other people's stuff so you can put their glasses on for a bit. See the world through their eyes. That's what we need to take time to see it as other people see it so we can then discuss what's in it for them. But welcome wagons is something I work with rural people. I just heard the mayor of Arizona and others talk about how explosive Arizona's growth is. How many of you have concerns about that, particularly in rural areas? There's a concept that we've lost in our rural areas especially. It used to be that new people were welcome, but now we're scared of them. We want people to be able to move back if there are son, daughter, grandson, granddaughter, niece, nephew, but that dink from Phoenix or Seattle, we put up billboards in Montana that said, "Don't Californicate Montana." The first stop for my wife was the courthouse to get rid of her driver's license because she was tired of taking the abuse. We treat newcomers like the enemy until the week after they're dead. And then we're surprised when they congeal into other groups of people, peer groups, that are being treated the same way. And then they start to become a problem because they bring their city ways to our... You know what? We're the ones that have the problem. In the old days, new people was new blood, new money, somebody besides a cousin to marry our daughter. We met them with a pie. We need to do that again. We need to meet the incoming. We can't stop them. We know why they're coming. They love the beauty, the culture of our area. We can't stop them without giving up the private property rights we so enjoy. So they're coming. What we ought to do is meet them with a pie and tell them about what's made it be what it is today, partially because of humans, partially in spite of us, and what we hope it to be tomorrow and how they can participate in that. Local government should have a welcome wagon for new people coming in. And Earth Day. How many of you celebrate Earth Day? Everybody should. And particularly in our rural areas. But Earth Day shouldn't be a doom and gloom bongo drum beating contest of what's wrong. We should be celebrating progress. I asked Louisiana Pacific one time, do you guys do anything on Earth Day? And they said, we spend $500,000 on it. I said, on what? And they said, increased security. How about if Earth Day was a recognition of the hills that humanity still has to climb, but a celebration of the progress we've made? We've come a long ways since Earth Day #1, and we should celebrate that. while we ponder what we've got to do to continue the progression. For those things, local government can help lead there. And I believe society is ready. Society is ready. They're tired of the doom and gloom, bongo drum beating, incense burning, planet is dying crap that they have been getting since they were 5. We have generations now that have been told 3 times that they're going to die in 12.2 years because their skin's going to fall off. And then we want them to recycle a can. Bite it, I'm going skiing is their content. They're tired of that. They're tired of hearing what's wrong and ready to start hearing about what can be right. And that's a door for new leadership. It's a door for new environmental vision. And I know from my speaking, used to be all my speaking was in timber towns and ranching towns. And now I do a lot of university speaking. I do a lot of the National Association of Counties. This group, the American Banking Association, they're asking for a different view from a real person from the ground. They want to hear from Arizona, and especially the next generation. I just watched them walk out about an hour ago. That next generation excites me. We see all the bad stuff that's going on campuses. That's a small thing. There's a bunch of the next generation that is starving for leadership. I know, especially the University of Illinois asked me to come talk to them. Student president called me and said, "Would you come talk to us on Earth Day?" I said, "You want a logger on Earth Day? You're looking for somebody to kill, aren't you?" But I went, sure enough, 3,000 kids in the auditorium, picketers in the back of the room. They looked me up on the internet, and some people didn't like me. They're calling me some pretty fun names, but I talked to them about what we just talked about. That the old environmental movement was timely and necessary, but failed to mature beyond a 3-word vision of stop doing that. And when they were sharing planet Earth with 9 to 11 billion souls, stop doing that wasn't going to cut it. We need a new environmental vision built on hope instead of fear, science instead of emotion, education instead of litigation, resolution instead of conflict, and employing rather than destroying human resources. And that new movement's going to be led by rural people because we live too close to the ground to pretend. And I sat down and I still get goosebumps. Those kids stood up and they clapped and they stomped and they whistled and they escorted the picketers out of the back of the auditorium. And I asked the student president what happened. I thought my job here today was to get tomatoed off stage. His direct quote was, "We are tired of hearing that the planet your generation is handing us is a piece of crap. You gave us hope." The next stop was Dartmouth. It was an Earth Day swing. Same reaction from the kids. Next stop was Brown, Ted Turner's alma mater, not a bastion of conservative thought. Same reaction from the kids. Now I do campuses nationwide. The next generation is starving for leadership. They should not accept anti-environmental dogma. That they are ready for a new environmental vision, a new environmental leader. That's the horse that we need to ride. I'm going to quote, that's the book. It was 2 professors from the city at Purdue University asked me if I would write my book. They knew how to do books. I knew how to jack my jaw. So there's my jaw jacking in book form. It's on Amazon. It's $12. I'm going to close with a very personal message. I was here about 10 years ago. And I've been on the road for a long time. And I often get asked if I ever get tired of fighting for industry, is how a lot of people phrase it. I'm here to tell you I haven't spent one day fighting for capital I industry. Industry is going to be fine somewhere. Someone is going to manipulate the environment for humanity. There are going to be 9 to 11 billion people if we don't get smacked by an asteroid. And they want food, clothing, and shelter. So somebody's going to provide it. Industry is going to survive. The question is it going to survive here? Is there going to be an economic foundation so that we can have a community for our kids to come back to if they'd like to? That's the real issue. The little I of industry is at stake. The culture of production is at stake in this country. And when my butt gets tired and I'm driving home at 3 in the morning tonight, I'll be thinking about this guy. Because what keeps the fire going in my belly is a promise to myself that another generation in our family is not going to go through what he did. We have a very good school system. Tomorrow morning I address our entire school system to talk to them about hope for the next generation. Because when I was in the 3rd grade, we took the Iowa Basics test in our little timber town. And you guys remember that test? Test to tell how smart or dumb you are? When the results got back in, the principal and teacher, I was in the 3rd grade, principal and teacher called Mom and Dad into school. I laid awake waiting for him to get home. Dad didn't know that I was awake, but we lived in a trailer house at that time. It had little thin walls, and I overheard every word. What they talked about was how to keep me from being a logger, because my dad had been told that night if I ended up being a logger, it was his fault. And for the first time in that proud man's life, instead of looking down at his hands and seeing calluses on his palms and dirt under his fingernails and that being a source of pride, because it built our company, it built our town, it built our state, it built our bloody nation. For the first time in his life, it was a source of shame and guilt. He got the message. Tens of millions of rural people have gotten the message. And the message was he didn't have a heritage worthy of passing on, at least to intelligent children. I had scored high on the Iowa Basics test, and I was going to be too smart to be a dumb old logger like him. He wrapped that misplaced mantle of guilt around his neck and wore it for decades. And I can tell you I got to work with him for almost 40 years. And when we were standing out in the national forest looking at the public's trees on a hillside, trying to figure out how to apply modern forest management to that hillside, I had degrees hanging on the wall. Dad didn't have a one, and there was a stupid person standing there, and it was not my father. He had more sustainable environmental information in his brain that came to him through his hands than he could have gotten with a doctorate degree from Yale. But his was experiential. He learned by doing. And society has discounted that knowledge base for far too long. I have 11 intelligent grandchildren. The leading export of our rural areas has got to stop being our young, well-educated, well-rounded children. If we continue to export them with no hope of coming back to an economic foundation of production, what are we going to be left with? Scary Larry and his idiot brother in a 1952 John Deere tractor doing what? We need our smart kids back. We need them to go to Arizona State and University of Arizona, and then if they choose to, we need them to want to move back to Show Low and Surprise. Because we need our smart kids back in our forests and our fields and our farms. It's going to take really creative kids doing really creative stuff to feed and clothe 11 billion people and save the earth. And for me, that's what's at stake. I have 11 and a half grandchildren. If they want to move back to Montana after they're done with school and grab the flag of either farming or ranching or logging, they're going to do it without a social class head trip. I'm going to leave with what Mom left me with. You guys, particularly in leadership, you've got so many things on your plate. Trying to figure out how to govern. Please, among that, try to figure out how to focus on something that you can make a difference in. You as a leader don't have to try to do everything. You have to do your part. And I have a tendency of trying to eat elephants when I see them in the room, so when Mom left, she left me with this, and I leave you with it. It is from numberless diverse acts of courage and belief that human history is shaped. Each time a man stands up for an ideal or acts to improve the lot of others or strikes out against injustice, he sends forth a tiny ripple of hope. And crossing each other from a million different centers of energy and daring, those ripples build a current that can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. That was Bobby Kennedy, South Africa, 1966. It's also 2018, the annual conference of the League of Cities and Towns, Arizona. You guys don't have to go out and try to be a wave. You have to be committed, continue to be committed to be a ripple. Together, believe me, you will make a wave. And it's a wave that gives me hope for my grandchildren. God bless. Please come to Libby. We need the tourists.
Thank you, Bruce.